Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And today we're talking about Debussy's Image for Orchestra, and a recording that I have recommended for quite some time. Because, the Image for Orchestra don't get the kind of play that La Mer does. There's a good reason for that. First of all, it's a triptych like La Mer, but in the middle of a triptych is a triptych, that is Iberia, which is vastly more popular than the other two works, which are quite short. That's Gigue and Ronde de Printemps, Spring Rounds. They're lovely works, but they're also much more elusive, more modernist, a little bit spacier maybe than La Mer and the Nocturnes, and so they just don't get the same kind of play. And also, determining a great recording of these works is a little bit more complex, because they're not, let's face it. When we think of great recordings, we usually think of recordings that are emotionally intense. They're recordings of either classical masterpieces or the great romantic exordia, the kind of things that really have, orchestras playing like crazy and big tunes and luscious textures and all of that stuff. That you want it to have an enormous impact. Well, Debussy's music is not like that generally, and it's certainly not like that in the Image. They're a touch austere. They're cool emotionally. They're full of subtle colors and textures. They're not about making a big statement. So that means that most conductors don't make big statements when they record them. And so if you can find recordings that have all three of them on one disc and are at the same time really significant in terms of the way that they handle the music, in terms of the way that they make the music sound, it's going to be very, very special, but not obvious. It's just not obvious stuff. So with that said, the greatest recording ever selection, and there are a couple of three or four that sometime in this series, which will run for the next 150 years, we will get to at some point, is this one. And I've talked about it before, the Cleveland Orchestra with Pierre Boulez on Sony. Now, this particular recording reflects a genuine moment because it was recorded in 1967. And in 1967, Boulez was still in the first flush of his career as a conductor. He was being molded, or in some ways encouraged, let's just say, by George Szell, who was still alive for the next 3 years. He would be. Cleveland was at its absolute peak. Really a non-pareil ensemble. And it was a non-pareil ensemble that was ideal, absolutely ideal for the performance of this music, which for some reason Szell didn't want to do. He did La Mer, and, it was a little bit of Debussy, but he wanted Boulez also to express himself in this French repertoire. And Boulez did La Mer this time. It's part of his, Debussy orchestral works, Sony box, but with the Philharmonia, or was it the New Philharmonia? It was the New Philharmonia then. That exciting La Mer. People liked it when it came out. I find it a little bit perfunctory. That's me. But the Image, ooh, baby, we're at a totally different level, because the orchestra in those days was playing with such finesse and with such transparency in every section, top to bottom. It was just the right sound for this music, and they're recorded superbly. The recording has a crystalline clarity and tangibility that's amazing. It's really one of Sony's best recordings of the era. Every single click and pop and ding and swoosh, of the percussion, or the ripples of the harp and subtle woodwind chord, and it all just comes out. It's beautifully caught, beautifully captured, and the works themselves were absolutely ideal for Boulez at this point in his career. Remember, he was known as the French Correction. As the guy who was hyper interested in detail and subtleties of timbre and texture, which was really very similar to the kind of music he was writing himself. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think he identified so strongly with this music. Interestingly, he remade the Image for Deutsche Grammophon with the same orchestra. And I mean, they're very good. They're extremely good, but they're not as good as this. And that's because of the engineering. It's because that incredible, pristine cleanness and clarity of sonority isn't quite there on those DG remakes, but it's here in abundance. And it's just a stunning, stunning recorded moment. And I recommend it accordingly. I always have, I always will, I still do. Really, really an extraordinary, extraordinary outing for Boulez, Cleveland, Debussy, and all concerned. Sony, CBS at that point. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.